Welcome to the Legal Leaders Podcast, brought to you by InView, LawView's community for in-house legal professionals, where we dive into the heart of the legal profession to bring you unfiltered discussions with industry titans on a broad spectrum of topics.
Hello and welcome to the Legal Leaders Podcast. I am your host, Emma, and I am joined today by Adam Becker. Adam is the Director of Legal Ops at Cockroach Labs, and he's done a few things with our InView community in the past. He actually ran a workshop for us with our InView Connect conference in London on Legal Ops 101, as well as contributing to some articles. So it's really cool to have you on the podcast today. Welcome. But we're going to talk about something a bit different today. We're going to talk about your journey into legal ops and some of the things that you've had to kind of learn and unlearn to really succeed in the role that you're in now. So I'd love for you to share a little bit with the audience about you and your journey to where you are now.
How did I get to where I am
and
what I do? This is my third legal operations in-house role. So I've been doing legal operations 9, almost 10 years at this point. But I spent my first 15 years of my career in law firms doing a lot of other things. I started as a law firm lawyer right out of law school here in the US, went to go work for a big firm based in New York and did IP litigation for a number of years.
Wow.
Yeah. And then switched internally at that firm to move into first the recruiting department, and then I moved to the West Coast and oversaw administration and operations of the 2 Northern California offices there before I left that firm and went to one other firm for a little bit of time where I did professional development for IP lawyers.
Cool.
In a law firm, I like to say I did everything except marketing. I don't know how to do law firm marketing. But I knew law firms pretty well for a while, and that was surprising to me that I stayed at a firm. My first firm I stayed at for 11 years, so that was surprising. 12 maybe, yeah.
What was the culture like at like a big kind of, was it New York you were based in, is that right? So what was the culture like at a like big New York litigation firm? Like I guess I'm thinking of, I have a perception of what that may have been like, but I'd love for you to share like what it was actually like for you.
Well, it wasn't a litigation firm. I worked in IP litigation, which was a very small department of a very big firm. I worked at SCADA in New York, and that's where I started. And at the time, I think there were 2,000 lawyers globally, so a pretty big legal organization with 30, 40 different practice areas with specialties within them. So culture, the one thing I will say about that firm, that was a firm that grew organically, never by acquisition. They would bring on partners from time to time in specific areas, but they were very focused on the culture of the firm. And I think when you're in law school, or maybe even when you're in real life, those sorts of things sound kind of less important than the actual work. But the culture of the firm, it actually was quite strong. We used to say we were a bunch of very high achieving lawyers who still thought like they were scraping their way up and being, quote, scrappy. The customer service was, of course, super important to them in responsiveness, but also highly, highly intelligent lead lawyers and really hard work. It was a sort of firm that you didn't really hire for your typical usual run-of-the-mill sort of stuff. You hired it for make or break sort of litigation, M&A, big project, really, really big stuff. So the work was intense and therefore long and therefore late. And oddly enough, you formed really close relationships with people just through the course of being there. And it was all across the firm. It wasn't just like you and a partner. You worked with so many people in such an intense way that you form bonds. And for me personally, it wasn't sustainable for my life, nor did I want it to be. Some people really love it, but they used to say it was work hard, play hard.
Yeah.
And you'd work till 10, 11 o'clock at night. Then you go grab a drink with your friend until whatever time. It's New York, and it's always open.
Mm.
And then you go home and you go back the next morning at 9 or 10 and do it all again.
Yeah. Wow. And what was it then? So you obviously you spent time in the firm and you moved around within the law firm. What sort of what inspired you or what motivated you to kind of step out of a traditional legal role and try something different?
Well, it's, of course, for everybody, it's individual and complicated. For me, I did not love practicing law enough to compensate for the lack of control in my personal life.
Mhm.
So if I had really said, this is my thing, I want to do this forever, then giving up some of the things that you give up to do it would have been okay. But
Mm.
they really weren't for me. I was probably perfectly fine as a lawyer. I don't think I was amazing. I think I was good, but quite frankly, by Skadden standards, that's very good, I guess.
Mm.
Um, but you have no control over your life. Everything is very emergency. It is a lot of work, and it is the sort of place where somebody could say to you, something just came in, we need you to be on a plane tomorrow to Dallas for the next 2 weeks, and you drop everything and you do it. And at a time in your life that is fun and doable, and as you get older and have other obligations, you really have to think about what is more up for you. And for me, that wasn't it. And I didn't like the litigation thing that much. I'm not a fighter by any stretch. When a new thing would come in, I'm like, we can fix this. There's a solution. That's not really how litigation works, though. So it probably wasn't my calling.
Yeah.
But I liked the people. I liked the subject matter. I did not like arguing with opposing counsel about everything.
Yeah, I can so relate to this because I studied law. I went into commercial litigation, and I remember looking at the partners in the firm and thinking, I don't want their life. Like, I don't want what they have. So why am I going to grind to get there when I don't even want the end goal? And I guess that's what you're saying as well. Like, I definitely wasn't in a big firm like that, but even just that moment where you think, actually, why would I put it, like, if that's what you wanted, you'd be happy to put in the extra effort for sure. But I just never really wanted it that much. And it was that kind of moment of like, I just don't think I'm ever going to be amazing because I don't want it,
The credit I'll give to that level, that partner, they really loved what they did, and they found a joy and drive in it that just didn't hit me in the same way. So yeah, I would look at them and be like, I don't want to do that. But the funny thing about what I think you don't realize when you're in school is that time is a very strange thing, and you can make all your plans and have your 1, 2, 3 year goals, but 5 years went by very quickly. And one day I looked up and I said, what am I still doing? Ooh, I was supposed to be out of here 3 years ago. What is going on? And that's when I did kind of the self-analysis of what do I want to be doing next? Because I don't think this is it.
Yeah. I think that's such a powerful thing to be able to do, to actually stock take of what you're doing and not just be on this hamster wheel because that's, you've studied law and that's what, you think you should be, and actually reflect and say, this isn't a lifestyle I want. Like, what else can I do within here? And obviously you sound like you tried a few different things, but you have ultimately found your passion in legal ops.
I did a few different things, and things change. Things evolve, and sometimes you have to know when to accept what the universe is throwing at you, and sometimes you have to stand up and say, I'm going to make a pivot here. I'm going to go in a direction that I want. And there is no formula for that. And quite frankly, yes, like I'm doing legal ops now. I love it. It didn't exist when I was a practicing lawyer.
Yeah.
I did a number of very different and random things, which all kind of led up to having the experience to go into a role like this and apply it here. So yeah, it was not it was not linear, I will say that. And and the world changed. When I went into the recruiting department there, that was an amazing job. I went to London for half a year. I went to California all the time. I worked around the country. I worked with everybody. The world changed. And, we had the Great Recession in the US, and just everything kind of stopped, and recruiting changed. And I think that was the first time I ever saw like the financial thing really impact how the firm operated. At that time, as we were doing less hiring for incoming, especially, when the head of firm administration offers you a promotion if you move to California, you're like, well, San Francisco isn't that bad. And I knew, because I've actually lived there before. And so you just kind of go with the universe on that and give it a whirl. But then I want you to come back home to New York.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And tell us then about that first role in legal ops. Obviously, you mentioned it didn't exist when you started your legal career. It was this new thing. What kind of made you take the leap to give it a crack? And what was that first role like for you in terms of change?
So that was one of the times that was intentional. It was not taking a leap. And this was actually a plan, though a very poorly thought out one, I would say. I learned about legal operations through a friend of mine who was a deputy general counsel at a big company, who said to me, we've opened this role. I don't know what it is. I don't even know how to describe it, but you should take this. You know how to do what we're looking for. And I said, what a riveting job description. Let me look at it. So I did. And he was right. There were 12 things on there, 10 of which I had actually done: recruiting, training, evaluations, budgeting, strategic planning, like all that. I'm like, yeah, I've done this. I sorts of roles existed. So I wouldn't say that was an application process. I spoke to the general counsel there, and I said, I wasn't inclined to move back to California, but for the right role, I could do it, and this seems pretty cool. And he was very upfront. He said, listen, I know you could do this. I got no doubt you'd be great at it. I need somebody who knows how to select, design, and implement technology. And I said, well, I work at a law firm. I don't do any of that. Which is true. And he said, yeah, I know. He goes, that's what I need right now. But you never know. And I said, you never know. And then I hung up the phone and went to a trusted advisor who I was working with. And I said, do you know about this thing? She said, no. I said, this is our next job. This is what we're going to do. So I then made a point to look for and position myself to move in-house, to take all these things that I had done between lawyering, recruiting, firm office operations, which, is everything from overseeing billing, IT, HR. And then, weirdly enough, on the professional development side, I was also responsible for staffing new matters in a way that the client expected to be reasonable / efficient, and then for the firm to be profitable with the right leverage and knowing the realization of the particular client. So I was already starting to do all this other stuff, but on the law firm side, without realizing there would ever be a counterpart on the in-house side. So I kind of had this weird collection of experiences, which at the time looked like a jungle gym mess of, yeah, I've done that, but what is it going to give me in my next job? Into finding roles where it was all put under one umbrella into a professional existence. So I got pretty fortunate with that timing. So it was one of the times when I said, I'm going to go in this direction. I don't know how long it'll take, but I'm going to go for it. A lot of my post-lawyering experience, all of that stuff, right? Everything you do in a law firm in those departments is managing teams or people in some way, shape, or form. My first in-house legal operations role wasn't even called legal operations at the time. I think we were under strategy and planning or something like that. It was a talent management role within the legal department,
Okay.
which 6 months later became a full-fledged, what we call legal operations existence.
Yeah.
So originally it was all about professional training, management, and then very quickly became about IT, outside counsel management, efficiency, process improvement, operational excellence, and that's how it happened.
That's such a cool story. And it actually makes, like, for what you said around like lawyer, like being a lawyer didn't make sense to you because you didn't like, having conflict, and you like problem solving. And then legal ops, the way you describe it, is that sort of problem solving kind of space where you actually are, you've got these things and you're finding solutions rather than arguing points, like it sounds like you really found your place. What were some of the things that you had to unlearn as you made that transition? And were there any kind of like specific mindsets or approaches that you found kind of difficult in those initial kind of days in that legal ops space?
Well, remember, because my path was not linear,
Mm.
so the unlearning, the hardest part, weirdly enough, was going from being a lawyer at a firm to being on a different part of that firm.
Okay.
And that's where, managing teams and um, just doing things differently. I think the first thing that you have to unlearn, even if you don't realize you have to unlearn it as a law firm lawyer, is you become overhead. And law firm lawyers are, without even meaning to, just operate a certain way where they are revenue centers.
Mm.
And there's nothing wrong with that. That's what a law firm does, right?
Mm.
It's business of making money off of its lawyers.
Mm.
So, um, kind of understanding there's a difference between that and being considered overhead is sometimes difficult for people, because professional services, if you're a professional service provider, you are what brings in the money, and you
Mm.
you have different sorts of expectations and different sorts of benefits. So I think there's that. Um, Weirdly enough, then there's the billable hour thing you have to unlearn. And this is actually really hard. I don't think we give enough credit to this. I think everybody from day one of law school learns about the billable hour, how evil it is, how it's inefficient, and we've been talking about it for my entire career, and for the past 20 years, the death of the billable hour is nigh, and it's still here.
Yeah.
And there are many, many reasons for that. But from the perspective of somebody who used to keep time, it is very difficult to learn how to summarize your year and your achievements and what you've done without a number,
Mm.
and learning to measure your progress in terms of course, projects, but enhancements and relationships and betterment and baby steps to making something amazing or fixing a problem that nobody else fixed before is genuinely a hard skill to learn. And so, as much as keeping time is everybody's bane in legal land, it it gives you a number which summarizes what you did, and that number means something. And when you leave that number behind, you have to look to words mixed with numbers, and that can be very difficult when you're trained, willingly or unwillingly, that it's about a number.
Well, it's so true. It's a complete mindset change. I even remember my first non-legal role, I kept having the habit of going to hit a timer on the screen as soon as I started something. And I had to unlearn that, like, actually, you don't need a timer on right now. Like, you can just do your work. And it took me a while to actually, like, get out of that reaction of, like, hit a timer, stop a timer, hit a timer.
Right. You have to kind of relearn stuff, because let's say you're working on something, it's due in 3 weeks. Well, in your mind, you may have milestones that you have to get something done by, and you may do it well or you may not. Maybe you're inherently good at it, but over time you realize, all right, I need ticklers. I need to do a schedule. I need to keep myself. I need to do a project plan, right? Because I've got 4 of these going on at any given time. I can't juggle dates. Weirdly enough, when you're working on a litigation, yeah, you have deadlines, but often you're working on one litigation and it's a big one and you're working all the time. So those dates are in your brain. You know when that's
Mm.
coming, right? You have 5 projects going on. You have to learn how to manage your time differently. You have to learn that a deadline is a deadline. And, some people think that's a suggestion, not a deadline. And you have to work with those people. So there's that. I've been thinking about this a lot lately, actually, since I did the one-on-one discussion with you all at the
Mm.
London view. Just kind of how hard it is to go in-house. And another thing which I think is hard to balance, I don't know if it's unlearning or learning, but working in a law firm, you are instilled and expected to have both a degree of perfection and urgency at the same time. And I think those two things are at odds. And when you go in-house, it's different. The legal urgency is still kind of there in your brain. And sometimes you have to temper that to be like, okay, I've got 2 weeks. I need to do this immediately.
Mm.
But urgent versus important are 2 very different things.
Mm.
And perfection is elusive and probably not necessary in a lot of what we do. You just have to know what the right percentage is. Maybe it's 95, maybe it's 75, but perfection is not, it's only going to slow you down.
Yeah, that really sings true, because I can think about, like, because you're just in a completely different environment where if the business just wants something now, they'd rather have it at 80% than absolutely perfect. But you might be in that law firm mindset of like, it needs to be perfect and I need to spend time on this and then it's done. And it's just kind of about, like you say, balancing it. Is it good enough? Is it okay? Is it going to solve the current problem or thing that we need to do? It might not be perfect, but is it pretty much there? And it's kind of accepting that. And I can imagine, lawyers go into law, they have these high performing personalities, they like to have things, they like to be, always getting better and improving. And it's really hard to accept something or present something that you may not feel is perfect, right?
Yeah. Especially because law firm lawyers are also learned to identify all the things that could happen and could go wrong. And your business people often just want to know, what's the risk factor here? What's the level we're talking about? I'm going to do this. Is the risk a 10 or is it a 2?
Mm.
Or you don't know. You're not sure yet. How much time do you need? And I think that's, very different from writing a 20-page memo that covers every possible scenario, which doesn't really work in-house.
Mm.
But that's from the lawyer side. In our side, to your point, I get to say, we have this problem. All right, blah, 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 blah. Okay, we can fix this temporarily. It'll be good enough, but we got to put it on the roadmap to make it better later on. And that's kind of the truth, right? It's good enough now. Perfect, again, it's elusive, because if you are working in a company that's doing, not even doing well, just doing, things will change.
Mm.
If they're not changing, your company is doing poorly. But if things will change, and therefore even your perfection today maybe need to look at again in 6 or 12 months, because things change.
It's so true. It's so true. And it's such great advice, I think, for anyone that maybe is thinking of making this transition into legal ops, of like some of the things, maybe some of the challenges, or like we said, like mindset changes that need to happen. And it doesn't need to be immediately, but it's just to be aware, like it is such a different environment that you could be heading into. On the flip side of that, going into legal ops, there would have been so much learning, I can imagine, as well, in terms of skills. You're juggling so many different things. For you, what was like the steepest learning curve that you went on, or most interesting skill or something like that that you kind of had to adopt and learn as you made that transition?
Business strategy and corporate objectives.
Mm.
And it's very different in-house from a law firm. A law firm's corporate objective is to make more money.
Mm.
They might have the goal of expanding into different areas, but they're you hire more people, you build that out, you get what you need. Like they all have the same goal in the end, right? Their goal is typically to grow and make more money and make more partners profit. Business is a little bit different, and in order to be really good at legal operations, you need to be able to align your department's requests and planning with the business goals, strategy, and priorities, which means you have to understand the business's goals, priorities, and strategy, which means you have to understand how the business actually works and how it makes money.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot to learn there, and to harmonize all that is really, for me at least, it was a challenge. It was not an inherent sort of this is what makes sense to me. I never had to really face that before. And within legal, it can be even harder, because when you bring it down to the individual level, a lot of people in the legal department will feel very removed from a corporation's top level goals, right? If you're like one of my companies, the goal was to put our customers first. Great from a corporate perspective. If you're a litigation paralegal, it's really hard to align what you do with putting customers first. And that can be an art and just really a thought process to do. And quite frankly, if you're in legal operations, I don't ever interact with customers, right? So how am I gonna align with that? And that was hard. It can feel vague, but it's a steep learning curve, but it's a continual learning curve. But I know you also are kind of hinting at some of the other stuff, like managing people in a company is different. But again, I was fortunate that I was managing teams in the law firm that were not lawyers or paralegals. So, I had some very hands-on, very quick experience with that. And then running 2 offices, I had a lot of people who I was responsible for their day-to-day well-being, for lack of a better word, at the office. Tech is interesting.
Yeah,
tech is a little bit different, going into the side of deciding and implementing technology. If you really like it, you can make it work really quickly. You can learn it. I happen to like it.
I was gonna say, like, for your having in your previous roles, had you had any experience implementing tech or selecting a product, or was it all something you had to kind of quickly upskill and learn? Because obviously, like, legal tech as well is a relatively new space. Well, not new, but feeling new.
The only time I can remember being involved in that is like I was asked to pilot something or other that they were considering for something and give my thoughts on it. That was the only time I ever remember being involved in it. Other than that, they would roll out technology. You would learn to use it. You would say it doesn't work for you, and you'd move on.
Yeah.
That's how you did it. But interestingly enough, even then you can take things back to when you go forward. So even now, I do not love pilot programs. I'm very controversial in legal operations. I'm like, let's just turn it on. If it's ready, it's ready. But I also have the benefit now of working at a small company or a small legal department. I've done the pilot program thing. I get it. But having been subjected to a pilot program, I'm more than happy to be like, we've all worked together. We've all selected this. We've done the right thing. We're going to make it work and deal with the problems on day 2.
Yeah. I like that. I think it's quite cool.
But I'm not.
Jump in.
I'm in the majority.
You kind of mentioned there, you give feed, sometimes you introduce a new system and people say, no, we don't want to use that. So how have you found that in your role when you are, or in any of your roles where you are met with resistance to new tech or change? Like, as humans, we don't like change, and tech is such a big disruptor. So how have you approached that kind of resistance from the business or legal?
I think legal is probably the more common area where we have experience. I could talk about the business as well, my experience with that, but I have a very, very smart person who worked with me on implementing my first tech thing at an in-house situation said to me one day, well, I was very excited about all the things it could do, and I was, really highlighting X, Y, and Z. And she said to me, I need to just warn you, nobody's going to be as excited about this as you are.
So true.
Correct. Technology is a cultural change, and it's something to be aware of. And it's all dependent on your organization, its culture, and how people work. And that's something you really have to be attuned to do it well. There are cases when you work in a large legal department and you're never going to get full buy-in from everybody. You just need to buy-in from the top. You need a chief legal officer or a GC to say, this is coming, this is going to happen, and we're all going to do it. It is now the way we do things. That is appropriate from time to time. If you have the luxury of if you're working on a technology for a particular practice area within the department, learning to work with them and bring them along for the ride and the journey as part of your change strategy is probably the best way to go. So when things do launch and will go wrong, we've all worked on it together now we're going to make it work together. So that change mentality should always be part of anything that you're doing. Planning for not even resistance, just hiccups or obstacles or things that pop up. And quite frankly, if you're working in a company, like, we change really quickly here. If I don't get something up and running within a reasonable amount of time, it's going to be different in a year. And so I look at technology which can change with us, but it also means getting it done fairly quickly and perhaps not perfectly at first, right? But but 90% is great, because the reality is you're never going to get to 100% with any tech, right? There's always going to be an exception. But being sensitive to the resistance is kind of part of the job. And, I've always personally been very upfront about this. I have a hard time with it sometimes, because I go home, like when I go home tonight, I'm going to tell my Amazon Echo to play certain music and turn the lights on. And then I'm going to look at my phone and see what I have going on after this. And then I'll probably tell it to remind me of something tomorrow. And then I will get some sort of notification on it where I'm like, oh, right, let me go call so-and-so. And my whole life is dictated by technology without me ever thinking about it. And then when people go to work, they expect it to be 1984 and they want a green blinking cursor, because that gives them comfort at work. And meanwhile, I went to sleep and, my unnamed smartphone pushed out a new update overnight. And I'm like, I don't even know how to use this today, but I'll figure it out later. And I will. Because in real life, we figure it out. You get annoyed for a minute or two and then you keep doing it. At work, people feel differently about it. And I've learned to understand that people want some degree of certainty and expectation at work, and they want to know what's going to happen when you And if you can plan with that in mind, you can get greater adoption. But I think the idea of saying this is going to make it easier and quicker and better and you're going to love it, they're not going to love it if you do that. It's really figuring out what is going to drive the adoption of the new technology that you're putting in, because it's time to put it in, because things have changed, because the world is changing, because if we don't do certain things, we will slow down and fall behind. And that can be very scary to people, especially if they've been doing basically the same sort of work for a long time in a way that they like to do it. Right now, I do think the fear around generative AI is not only palpable, but in some cases maybe not totally crazy, because it can take away a lot of the minutia. Some of us have gotten used to doing, which is great for people like me and you who are like, I don't want to do it anyway. But because there's always more to do. And I think people are very comfortable with their routines at work.
I just have never thought of that the way you put it. And I just think it's so powerful to think about, like how easily, even if we just think about like a social media app we use on our phone, a Facebook, they do an update. And for a moment, we're like, oh, I don't like the new update, but we keep using it like 5 minutes later, or Instagram, whatever, I'm just thinking of an example, and it's so true. And it's not necessarily the way you communicate about it. Like, like this is going to be this cool platform and it's going to allow you to do this and this and this, but it's actually like, no, we just need to keep up. Like this is going to allow us to keep up, and the world is changing. I think that's such a powerful thing for people to think about. And so I hope everyone just really hones if they remember anything from this podcast, and I'm sure they will, but that is just like gold there. I think that's awesome. So thank you so much for sharing that, because I know that's come from a lot of experience and working with legal teams and implementing tech and going through those journeys. And there'll be so many people that listen to this podcast that have maybe never implemented tech, or they're very much at the start of their legal tech journey and not even know where to start. So any advice for those people if they're doing it for the very first time?
Oh, I think my advice for anybody doing anything for the very first time in legal operations, especially if you were a lawyer, is to ask questions. A lot of questions. Deep, probing, borderline personal questions. And learn as much as you can about the situation before jumping on anything. When I make a tech selection, it does take time. And it takes time based on what I'm learning the team needs or the business needs from us, and making sure that we're all aligned. And I've asked enough questions to get an understanding of what the real kind of current tension points are, and then what the ideal situation would be. And if you say to people, if you can make this process better, what would you do? You probably won't get very far. You'll get a few answers. But if you can get people to envision how their workday would look if they could just make it any way they wanted, what would they get rid of? Would they make simpler? Doesn't matter if it exists or not. Doesn't matter if it's possible. Think about what that is. And if you can get to a point when you all agree on what the priorities are, selecting tech, which can help achieve or get closer to those priorities, will help a lot more than just putting in something because we know it's good and keeps us organized. That doesn't really always work. But sometimes that's what you need, right? Very few in-house lawyers are going to have very passionate feelings about an e-billing program. And you may, if you're an experienced legal operations person, but they just want to get that bill out of the way. So maybe your problem isn't actually e-billing. Maybe your problem is you need more predictable flat fees in that situation. So it's technology is never a solution until you have the actual problem and process fixed. That's my advice for tech. If you know what the process is, if you know what the issues are that you need to fix, and ultimately you're buying technology just to lay over the solutions you've already created, and that makes it a lot easier.
Amazing. I think that is just such great advice, and I hope, and there's so many people on different journeys, and like from legal ops and legal tech, there'll be so many legal teams that don't have legal ops yet. So I think being able to listen to someone who's been operating in this space is just so insightful. When you look back on your career so far, is there a key lesson, or can you think of a pivotal moment that's really shaped you as a legal leader, or the way that you approach career? Is there anything that's kind of stand out for you? It's a deep question, this one.
Deep, borderline personal. There it is. I think, and maybe this is still, maybe there's still a little bit of practicing lawyer in me when I say this, so I apologize to the world. When you say pivotal moment, it's unfortunately very rarely one of joy.
That is true.
And it's, I don't want to say necessarily negative, but let's say that pivotal moments are often at the very least challenging and often not fun. They're pivotal because you're having to do something which maybe you haven't done before because you haven't wanted to do before, and maybe nobody wants you to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they can be tough. I think I would say, I've thought about this a little bit. There have been times in both law firms and in-house when I've had to be the bearer of unwelcome news. And sometimes that is being delivered to a person, and sometimes it's being delivered to a group. And very few people are very good at delivering unwelcome news. It's not something that we just do in our lives. We don't want to do in our lives. We don't want to do at work. And I think that no matter how much guidance you get, I did accidentally once, very early on, kind of let my humanity show through in the moment when I was doing something that I really did not want to be doing and nobody wanted me to be doing. And the instant feedback on that was, this is actually a horrible situation. It's the worst we could ever imagine. I very much appreciated that you showed how unhappy or how concerned you were about this without meaning to, and that I could tell this was something that was affecting you personally as well. And even though it doesn't make the situation better, it does make me feel better that this, there's somebody who's leading this who has a humanity to them. And that was accidental on my part. It's not like I cried in front of a room, but your voice cracks, you whatever it is when you're delivering that sort of news. And then, that stuck with me. And then from there, well, what do you do with that? And I think now I try to use empathy and humanity in the good ways, learning from the unfun ways into, how are we going to make this technology work better for you in the way that you want to live your life, in the way that you do your work, and understand what your concerns are about this, and really wielding that humanity, joke saying almost personal questions, in the professional context. It's become rewarded over the past few years, where empathy is now the number one characteristic people want in a manager. Wasn't that way 10 years ago. I think it's okay, powerful, and very, very mature to allow your sense of that to flow through. Not to be, have a lot of feelings in front of a room, but to show that you have a care about what's happening.
I think that's really, I think it's so important, because I think sometimes we forget, people come to work and they put on this persona of what they are at work, and, we're all humans, we're all people. And I think it's one of those things that you just have to have a conversation with someone, and it's just that reminder, if you're going into a meeting with someone and you think, oh gosh, I'm so nervous, they're this person, rah, rah, rah. And it's like, yeah, but they're human too, we're both people. Just strip some of that away sometimes, and just actually, and it's about being your authentic self as well, whatever feels comfortable for you in the way that you show empathy. We all show it differently. And I think it's such an important lesson to have learned and been able to bring that through to your career. I think it's really, really cool to have that lesson, and lucky you had that early on. I think some people don't learn that till way down the track.
Well, it wasn't lucky that it happened earlier. It just happened. Things happen. But to what you just said, I was at a conference last week, and there was a round table, and somebody said something really funny. And she said, all that stuff about bringing your whole self to work, I don't do that. Nobody does that. You don't want me to do it. And I was like, right. And I was really do it. But it is okay to bring some of your best parts to work. And you don't have to bring your whole self. That was a buzzword.
That's true.
but you can bring the nice parts even when you have to do unnice things.
Yeah. That's actually a very funny point. Yeah, maybe don't like leave some of your home habits at home. That's fine, but yeah, bring the good parts.
Bring your home meal. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can leave some of it for your friends.
Yeah, exactly. Where do you see the in-house legal profession going in the next 10 years? I mean, there's already been so much change in the past 10 years, like we've talked about. What do you think, or what would you predict is going to happen?
I think it'll continue to expand. I think the roles are changing. The way we interact with law firms is changing. But let's start with, the highest role, the general counsel or chief legal officer. That person now is more than just a lawyer in a company. They are very quickly becoming strategic business advisors. Some of them are taking on departments which are not legal, right? HR, risk. One of my bosses had physical security underneath them. Like,
wow.
Yeah, things are happening. So that role is going to continue to expand and have more responsibility, which means it's going to move to an even higher influence level than now, and even less ability to manage a department day to day for that many people. So I do think that good management, legal operations included, is going to be growing and essential. And of course, the more that happens, even your top lawyers become much more like advisors and department leaders than practicing law. And so I think it's going to continue to grow, which means they're going to have to continue to do more law with the same. I don't like to use the buzzwords, but doing more with the same. I think that's going to definitely be a challenge, and we'll see what actually happens. But it also means certain things may not be handled by legal anymore going forward, or certain things will become so automated that they can just be glanced at rather than spent hours on. Obviously, the elephant in the castle is generative AI and what it can do, or what it will be doing. We are very much in a phase where we are starting to make some things happen with it, and some of them make sense, but we don't know yet how it'll be used daily. And that's going to be part of life, and it's going to be part of work life. And hopefully it will take away some of the noise and annoyance so people can continue to do the work they really enjoy doing, whether that be advising the business, whether that be substantive legal or management, or whatever it is. So I think it's going to keep growing.
I think it's exciting. It's interesting, the comment you made earlier about like how we use technology in our personal lives and then we don't, or we've got resistance at work. I think of that with AI. Like I use it both in work and home, but I can imagine there's probably some people who are already using it at home now for things, but haven't quite figured out how to use it in their role. Like if you think of like the amount of things like that you could do in your home life with it, and there's just something that changes when you turn on your work mode that some people might be resistance to using. It's funny how we have these almost split personalities from home and work.
I think Gen AI is fascinating for that reason, but let me ask you a question, because we'll make it about you now.
Yeah.
Enough about me. Where did you first use it?
Well, that's a good point. I think it was at home. And I think we were trying to like brainstorm ideas for something. We were trying to think of a name for something. And my husband said, we'll just put it in ChatGPT, like get some ideas off there. And I was like, what? How do you, what? Okay. And he showed me. And that was like the first thing. So it was just like brainstorming. What were we trying to name? We're trying to give something a name. And that was my first, it gave me a list of names. And I was like, oh, wow.
I used it for work first.
Ah.
I was like, I don't want to use it on my home computer. I don't know what it does. And what do I need? Like, I'm not going to be somewhere. I'm not writing term papers anymore. What am I going to do? But I did it for a work thing, and I'm like, huh. And then I did do it at home weeks after I first started. We had the first approved use at work. And what's even more interesting about Gen AI now, and we are totally off topic, so I apologize. So much Gen AI adoption, utilization, and guardrail is being driven by the legal departments of corporations now. And I think this is fascinating because for a group of people who shy away from technology, we seem to be the ones really embracing using it, how to use it. And this is a really interesting development to me.
Yeah, wow, that is fascinating. No, I love the off topic. I'm glad we've gone down this path. I'm sure everyone's sick of hearing about AI, but we just had to slide it in there for a little bit at the end.
Everybody is sick of it, but it's here, and it's still changing and evolving, and it's exciting, and it's boring, and it's repetitive, and it's brand new, and it's everything all at once. But it's quickly becoming part of our toolkit in-house.
No, 100%. I'd love to just ask you one more question before we wrap this conversation up, and it's probably more of a on the personal side. But if you weren't if you weren't doing legal ops, what would you be doing?
Wow. Okay, on the spot. So I'm gonna answer that question from the point of legal ops exists. I know about it. Like, this is what I very much enjoy doing. I still very much, expect to be doing this for a while. But if I can rephrase your question into, if you didn't have to worry about money, what would you be doing?
That's great. Do that.
I would love to take what I have learned through my time, primarily not as a lawyer, but as everything thereafter with management and strategy and process and efficiency and technology and just all the stuff that we do, and somehow apply it in like a nonprofit context where, they still need to operate well enough especially on limited budgets. But when I think about what could I give back, is implementing LawView going to help, the homeless shelter next door to me here? Probably not. But going in one day, maybe helping with some sort of like operational strategy and, how to optimize using what you got. Because when you strip it down, every company is different. Every part of the world is different. Nonprofits are different, associations are different, schools are different, hospitals are different, but we're not at a certain point. And there are underlying commonalities which you can apply when you learn whatever it is you need to learn about where you're working, but to make it better and to make people happier, and ultimately to have the mission of each organization expand, done better, done quicker, have more impact, whatever it is. And that goes private, public, nonprofit, etc. So if I didn't have to worry about money, that's what I'd be doing. Don't tell my boss. He'll probably won't get this far if he watches it.
I think that's so special. And I actually had another guest on the podcast say to me the other day, her real kind of philosophy is lift as we climb. And I think that's just like, again, it's that whole, like, how can we lift those up around us as we continue to climb? And it's something I think is really important. And people have always thought about it, but it's like, how can you give back and what can you do to help others? If we strip it, keep it, even you coming on this podcast, helping so many other people on their legal ops journeys, or implementing legal tech, just giving back to the community in that way, I think is such a amazing thing to be able to do. I know you're a busy person, so I just thank you so much for making the time to come on the podcast. I have learned so much from you. There's been so many little nuggets of gold my goodness. So great, Adam. Thank you so, so much.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's always flattering to be asked, and I appreciate what you're saying. I don't know how many nuggets I have, but you and I are like 20 hours different, so it's the end of my day, and I'm pretty punchy at the end of my day, so pure honesty here.
Yeah, and I've loved it. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed listening, please hit follow and leave us a review on your listening platform of choice. We love engaging with our community and hearing from you, so please head to inview.lawview.com. Thank you so much for tuning in.